News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
Hello, good evening and a warm welcome to Newsline. My guest this evening is better known as Dr. 1990 for his wonderful work with the ambulance service. Good evening and welcome to Newsline, Dr. Harsha.
Good evening, Faraz. Thank you.
Dr. Harsha, what is the situation now with our debt restructuring? Do we know, have we come to a conclusion with our international lenders? What's the status? Is it completed or is there some bits and pieces missing?
Well, we don't really know exactly where we are in terms of the external restructure. We hear stories that the Indians and the Japanese have basically said, look, we are willing to sort of do a deal with you, which is, I presume, satisfactory to the government. However, the domestic debt restructure is something that there has been a lot of discussion about, but no movement. That is because the Parliament now has to amend the Inland Revenue Act to increase the tax on the bonds that EPF and other such funds hold from 14% to 30%. So the amendment has been tabled, as you know, and on Tuesday the Supreme Court gave its determination. It's interesting because the Supreme Court essentially says, look, it is up to Parliament to decide how best to tax, and they've cited multiple prior determinations, and essentially says, look, we have really nothing to do with it, and governments tax different rates, not just here but everywhere else, and it is based on providing incentives and disincentives. So therefore, you people sort it out yourselves. But I would like to read something from that determination.
Please do.
Yes. It says at one point, it says a reference was made to an affidavit filed by the governor of the central bank at paragraph 61 of a prophetic doom of an apocalyptic collapse that will ensue if the domestic debt optimization process is unsuccessful or delayed. An Armageddon of gloom has been described in the following tenor. And it goes on to list a whole bunch of things. And I was just thinking, didn't people make fun at the leader of the opposition when he used these words 2 years ago? And it would be, the collapse would be of apocalyptic nature.
Do you think, Dr. Harsha, that the leader of the opposition, Mr. Premadasa, has had words with these people with the bench, unknown to you, me, and everybody else, because of these words,
I do not know that, but Justices Alvihare, Nawaz and Obesekara thought it fit to actually place this in their determination that was tabled in the House on Tuesday morning.
Dr. Harsha, isn't it true that some time ago, in the matter of this sort of super gains tax, where corporate Lanka with profits in excess of 2 billion rupees, the Supreme Court determined then that the rate of taxation and that policy was down to Parliament, and that they couldn't intervene on that.
Yes, correct. I mean, let me read this, the following paragraph also to reiterate that point. It says, there is institutional incapacity in the courts to reassess or reappraise the above policy decision. Right? Institutional incapacity. In the event evidence to the contrary is unavailable. Right? Evidence to the contrary is unavailable. In the circumstances, this court perceives a rationale underlying the differentiation, and this court is not irresistibly driven to the conclusion that the policy is manifestly unreasonable. In the circumstance, the Parliament, which has full control of public finance in terms of Article 148, is at liberty to make reasonable classification. And we take the view that manifest unreasonableness does not taint the clauses in the Inland Revenue Act that is sought to be impunged in these proceedings. So, I mean, so they put the ball back in the court of Parliament.
Yeah.
And however, they say in the event evidence to the contrary is unavailable, right? So, and that they don't have the institutional capacity. Now, the issue is, does Parliament have the capacity and the evidence?
Well,
So that is where we are stuck. I'll tell you what the reason is ever since the central bank and the treasury officials came to the Public Finance Committee and engaged us in discussion on this DDO and the probable adjustments to the EPFs and other pension funds returns, they agreed that they would submit to Parliament through the committee relevant information on the DDO with respect to the EPF portfolio. Now, till Tuesday, end of the day, this information was not provided to Parliament. And as a matter of fact, on Tuesday, a decision was taken at midday after the determination was announced in the House that on Wednesday and on Thursday, the House would debate the amendment to the Inland Revenue Act, which would increase, like I said at the beginning, the tax of the income of these pension funds from 14% to 30%. Now, the reason why they are doing it is, as the determination says, what is envisaged in this bill is the EPF and ETF would have to pay an income tax of 30%, or in the alternative, they are given an incentive or concession where they will only be paying 14% if they opt for the domestic debt optimization as proposed, right? So, now the question is, should the EPF and ETF undertake this or voluntarily agree, quote unquote, right, voluntarily agree to this swapping of the bonds and pay 14%, or not do it and pay 30%, which is actually better off? Which one is better off for them, right? So obviously, according to the calculations done by the central bank and others, what they told us is that look, if you undertake the restructure, you will end up with 12.5% for a couple of years, and thereafter you will get 9% for the duration of the new bonds that you would receive. And therefore, it would be better for the pension funds to participate in the restructure, because if you don't and you pay the 30% interest, you will only get 7.5%, 7.7%, as opposed to 9.1%.
Dr. Harsha, doesn't this then bring into real focus the real need for the EPF ETF funds to be administered and controlled independent of the central bank, for example?
For us, this argument has been going on for the last 50 years now, or not 50, but ever since EPF was established. And at the time, it was temporarily placed under the trusteeship of the central bank until they were able to find an agency to manage them outside the central bank. So the conflict of interest happens because, on the one hand, the public debt office of the central bank is trying to find the cheapest possible funding for the government as its agent. On the other hand, the EPF is trying to get the best possible return for its membership. And what invariably happens is the public debt wins over the EPF. You see, and during Cabral's time, or even before that, during Professor Lakshman's time, they had a cap. Look, we are only going to pay you 5% interest, whether you like it or not, right? So it is absolutely essential that at some point in time, this conflict is removed. So what we now understand is that there is going to be a independent debt office or government debt office, which will be placed in the treasury, taken out of the central bank. So therefore, this conflict to an extent will sort of cease to exist. But ideally, there has to be, I think, an agency that is outside of the central bank that manages the provident fund, and perhaps more than one agency that fund that manages the EPF.
And Dr. Harsha, I hear what you say about domestic debt restructuring optimization, but I would like to ask you, what sort of negative impact will be on our ability to restructure our international debt in view of this negativity that seems to have arisen, not because of the media, but because of government inaction in terms of this new documentary that has been put out? How much will that sort of impact on our ability to restructure?
Before I answer that, I just want to also highlight something, and I have some workings on the domestic debt done by Advocata. Now they estimate, right, the net loss to the EPF if they go ahead with this restructure to be about 165 billion rupees, which is roughly about 5-6% of the value, fair value loss of that much, right? That is because some of the bonds that EPF currently holds are legacy bonds, and they are not high yielding bonds. So therefore, when the swap is instituted, they actually gain. Some bonds, they will get a better return after the swap, because what happens is every bond is swapped for 12 different bonds, right? with each, we know what the maturing, the schedule is. I think 5 years it begins to mature, and then I think till 2038 or something like that. And then you get 12% for a couple of years and then 9% thereafter. So you can simulate it. No one knows the exact portfolio of the EPF, but Advocata has done some what they believe is the portfolio based on numbers that are publicly available. But on what are called the crisis bonds, right, they lose significantly, because those bonds which amount to about close to 2 trillion rupees, which had sometimes going beyond 30% yield at the time of issue. So those bonds, when they are swapped for these others, which works out to around the IRR works out to around 12.2%, the EPF loses, right? So that is where one can argue, look, the crisis bonds, whereas the EPF loses money, right? The actual loss is about 243 billion in total, the crisis bonds and some of the other bonds. But there is, like I said, a gain of some about 77 billion, and that's how the net loss comes to 165 billion. The equity issue comes in there, because this is the high yielding bonds that the EPF had, right? And the other people who have these high yielding bonds continue to enjoy the benefits of those high yielding bonds, whereas the EPF has to give up that opportunity. So in a way, the criticism that has been leveled against is that EPF is going to be completely sort of wiped out, 50% of the value is going to be lost, has no basis, right? We have to be fair in our criticism as well, right? So when you start looking at the data, for us, you see roughly this is the loss, right? Now whether they sort of take it into account, whether they get the fair value correction done, I don't know what accounting principles that they will apply, but it is quite evident that this loss is about the notional loss here, right, is about 5% of the value of the portfolio. So that is a assessment of the size of the loss.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harsha De Silva from the SJP. And that's the way it was on Newsline this evening. Take care. Have a great evening as much as you can. And, of course, God bless you all.